Welcome back to another edition of Thought Hockey. Today we're talking Jesperi, Kotkaniemi, the Carolina Hurricanes, the Montreal Canadiens, and offer sheets. On August 28th, the Carolina Hurricanes signed restricted free agent Jesperi Kotkaniemi of the Montreal Canadiens to a $6.10035 million offer sheet. We'll talk a little bit about the particulars, the money, the strangely low signing bonus, and a little bit. But for now, let's look at what it really means for these two teams and this player. Jesperi Kotkaniemi is a 21-year-old sometimes winger, sometimes center, who the Montreal Canadiens selected third overall in the 2018 draft, behind Rasmus Dahlin, who went to Buffalo, and his probable teammate, Andrei Svechnikov, second to the Carolina Hurricanes. Kotkaniemi recorded 5 goals this year in 56 games during the regular season with Montreal, and then, much to their delight, recorded another 5 in just 19 games in the playoffs. He's looking like a player who's ready to take the next step into a regular contributing top 6 forward in the NHL. Although they are currently sitting a little over $2 million above the cap, Montreal wouldn't have had a problem signing Kotkaniemi to what probably should have been between a $2 and say $4 million contract, depending on length and some other factors. They have Shea Weber and Paul Byron, who are both expected to be full LTIR status this season. So $11 million above the cap is essentially what Montreal has to spend. For the Hurricanes, Kotkaniemi's 6.1 does put them over, but again, they do have some LTIR space to use up. So that will go to making up for whatever Kotkaniemi puts them over. If I was Jesperi Kotkaniemi, I'd be doing cartwheels from Pori to Raleigh right now with all that extra money that he's going to make this year. I don't think it's reasonable to expect that he would have actually been a $6 million player at this point of his career. Taking a look at this deal, I think 2 things are clear. The Carolina Hurricanes like Jesperi Kotkaniemi as a player, and the Carolina Hurricanes want to get a little bit of payback for the Sebastian Aho offer sheet from 2 years ago. If you remember, it was the first day of free agency, July 1st, 2019, that the Montreal Canadiens and GM Marc Bergevin tried to make a big splash with an offer sheet to Sebastian Aho. That was a 5-year, $42 million deal, and it had a huge signing bonus up front and signing bonuses in subsequent years that the Canadiens were hoping that the Hurricanes and owner Tom Dutton wouldn't match. Now, 2 years later, the shoe seems to be on the other foot, and it's time for Carolina to try to snag a player from Montreal's roster. What should be pointed out, though, is that Aho, even though he did get a longer term and a more lucrative deal, was already a point-a-game player, and I don't think anyone was actually surprised with the number that Montreal was trying to sign him to. Didn't seem like it was an exaggeration of the amount of money he should be expecting for a player who is becoming one of the league's top centers. There's a few things to consider when signing an offer sheet. You want to know whether or not the team's going to match. You want to know whether the money you're about to spend is worth it. And you also need to consider whether the amount of compensation you're about to give up for the player is also worth it. On this contract, Carolina would have to give up a 1st and a 3rd round pick as compensation for signing Kotkaniemi. I don't think that's unreasonable. I think if you were trying to trade for him, you'd probably be giving up at least a 1st round pick, if not more. So a 1st and a 3rd seems pretty reasonable. Is the team willing to match? Well, I would think that given Kotkaniemi, although not a prospect anymore, is one of the best young players on the Canadiens, they should want to match an offer sheet. Now, here's the problem. Can they? Okay, let's break it down. Montreal currently is sitting $83,776,370 against the $81.5 million salary cap. When you add on the Kotkaniemi 6.1 and $35 contract, you get $89,876,405. Yeah, Dana, I know. I have a calculator too. Why are you telling me all this? Well, during the offseason, you're only allowed to go 10% above the cap with signing players. That means every team in the NHL has a leeway of $8.15 million for this offseason. Montreal is going to be $8.376 over the cap. So they can't even sign this deal unless they take some money off of their roster. That's definitely one point on the board for the Carolina Hurricanes. Sign a player to a contract that the other team simply can't match because salary cap won't allow it. Let's look at another wrinkle. The only reason why you have to offer sheet a player like this is because he's a restricted free agent. So when a player's contract comes up, the team needs to submit a qualifying offer. That has to be at least what the player made last year. So that means after this current season, Montreal is still on the hook to submit a qualifying offer of 6.1, a whole bunch of zeros, and $35 to Jesperi Kotkaniemi for the 2022-23 season. To avoid having to qualify Kotkaniemi next season, the Carolina Hurricanes would be able to start negotiations on a new contract starting January 1st, 2022. And I think there's some speculation going around already that deal may already be ready to go, and they'll just have to sign it once the league will allow it. And that's another point for the Hurricanes. And given that the compensation, again, is not very high, I don't see many reasons why this would be a bad deal for them. So the question remains, does Montreal match, or do they let him go and take the first and the third round pick as compensation? Some of the decision may factor into where Montreal thinks Carolina will finish this season. They had a good year last year, made it to the playoffs, went on to the second round before losing to eventual Cup champion Tampa. Could they replicate some of that this year? Could they go even farther with Kotkaniemi? So the best case scenario for the Canadiens is probably that the Hurricanes run out of wind and that bunch of jerks fail to make the playoffs. There's one more factor I would think of too if I'm Marc Bergevin and Canadiens ownership going forward. It's that, do you really want to hold on to a player who would sign this type of an in-your-face deal with another team? This deal on paper reads almost like a bit of a troll job by the Hurricanes, and Kotkaniemi is taking part in it. Do you really want to have that player come back to your team after he signs a deal that includes a signing bonus of the number worn by the player you tried to offer sheet on the same team 2 years ago? I know in sports, you sort of have to put those things aside. It's more about winning and having a good team than it is about revenge or spitefulness. But at the same time, we're dealing with human beings here. So there may be some hurt feelings, and there may be some people who just simply won't want him around anymore. If the Montreal Canadiens match, they can start negotiating on a long-term deal starting January 1st. But would Kotkaniemi even accept it if he doesn't want to be there? He knows that at the end of next season, the Canadiens are going to have to submit a qualifying offer to him of $6.1 million. And if they don't, he'll become a 22-year-old unrestricted free agent, free to go wherever he wants for whatever money he can get. That's another thing that makes this offer sheet so attractive to the player. When I consider all the factors, if I'm sitting in Marc Bergevin's chair, I think I'm going to walk away from the player and I'm going to take those 2 picks. I could easily trade those picks for some assets that I need on the team right now. And there's no way I'm spending $6 million on Jesperi Kotkaniemi for the level of production that he's going to give me. I just don't see him as that type of player yet. And when you consider next year, I'm going to have to qualify him again at $6 million or lose him as an unrestricted free agent. I'm happy to take what I can now and just rid myself of the problem. Well, the only thing left to do now is wait and see what happens. Does Montreal match and stick with the player? Does Kotkaniemi go to the Hurricanes and possibly become a superstar, or even worse, become a total flop? Can Montreal turn a first and a third into a player or players they can use right now? Could they possibly draft 2 useful players, maybe even a superstar in the first round of what's supposed to be a fairly deep draft next season? I can't wait to find out. Let me know what you think in the comments. And please remember to like and subscribe. And we'll see you next time on Thought Hockey.